The electric car industry is scouring the earth for battery metals. From lithium in the Chilean salt flats, to nickel in Indonesian rainforests, to valuable metals on the deep sea floor. China, the US and Europe are engaged in a resource arms race that stretches around the globe to try to meet skyrocketing demand. But extracting those raw materials comes at a cost, which can include scarred landscapes, toxic pollution and dangerous working conditions. There's no question combustion engines are a problem. They emit hazardous fumes and a fifth of yearly global greenhouse gas emissions. Electric cars are promising to change all that. Experts say the benefits of EVs outweigh the costs. But where do battery metals come from, and what is mining them doing to the planet? Your average consumer EV has over 6 times as much mineral content as a petrol vehicle. Most of that goes towards the massive battery pack. Each one is made up of thousands of cells. It's here that lithium ions move back and forth between an anode and a cathode as the battery charges up and then powers the vehicle. This is where you'll find many of the minerals at the centre of today's mining boom. Change the mix of metals here and you change the car's performance, including its range and charging speed. And each metal has its own story.
What I found was the hidden supply chains behind all this were dominated by China, but they also involved a lot of trade-offs, environmental impacts, and a huge need for minerals.
This is Henry Sanderson. His book, Vault Rush, looks at how the race to go green has upended global supply chains and transformed landscapes, like in Chile's Atacama Desert.
What struck me when I went there was just the sheer size of these pools in the middle of the desert.
Locked away in these vast salt flats is a lightweight metal used in nearly all EV batteries, lithium. The silvery white mineral is the world's lightest metal and can be found in rocks, clay, and saltwater. More than half of the global lithium resources are in the so-called Lithium Triangle in Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. Lithium here is stored in underground saltwater called brine. Billions of gallons of it are pumped to the surface every year, where it is left to evaporate.
The lithium from Chile actually has a low carbon footprint because it's using the energy from the sun.
The more yellow the pond, the higher the concentration.
Al principio veíamos color de turquesa, donde tenía un poco porcentaje de litio. Acá ya tiene un gran porcentaje de litio, ya sea.
It can take more than 1,000 gallons of brine to produce enough lithium for just one electric car battery. 2 companies control the right to operate here, American Albemarle and Chilean SQM. In 2021 they exported more than $890 million worth. And satellite imagery shows how their mining operations have transformed the landscape. It can take around 18 months for the brine to move under gravity through the series of ponds. The lithium-rich salts are then loaded into trucks and then taken to a processing plant near the coast, where they're purified into battery-grade lithium. Pumps suck out enough brine to fill an Olympic swimming pool every 20 minutes. And the factories that process the salts draw fresh water from underground aquifers. Water usage is, of course, a sensitive issue here in the desert. In some areas of the Atacama, rainfall has never once been recorded. Jorge Muñoz Coca is a member of the local Atacameño indigenous community.
Tenemos una relación muy significativa con el agua. Eso es lamentable que exista en esta área tanta explotación.
Chilean mining company SQM has run into trouble with environmental regulators for extracting too much brine and fresh water. In an email to Business Insider, SQM said it aims to be water neutral by 2030 as it switches to desalination plants and more efficient lithium extraction technology. In neighbouring Bolivia, Chinese and Russian companies are investing nearly $3 billion in an array of new lithium plants. But they're gambling on a relatively unproven set of technologies called DLE, or direct lithium extraction. Instead of waiting for water to evaporate from brine, this approach draws out the lithium using a range of chemical or heat-based processes. It can take only a few hours, but it's unclear how water or energy intensive these processes will be. With foreign mining companies moving in, locals like Abdon Morales are worried about the precious water supply.
En la casa no debe haber agua.
Vamos a buscar.
He's disillusioned after years of high hopes for Bolivia's lithium industry. A pilot plant was opened 60 miles from his home in 2013, promising jobs and prosperity. But Bolivia lacked the technical know-how to scale up, and the jobs never came. Abdon is not against lithium mining, he just wants any company coming in to extract the metal to be open and honest.
Este tiempo poca agua. Ante todo, siempre el diálogo, ese sería el camino. Que ellos vengan a sincerar, a decir, esto es lo que vamos, esto es lo que necesitamos. Porque si ustedes no nos van a dar agua, estas plantas van a ser un elefante blanco.
As of 2021, there were 21 lithium mining operations globally. Industry experts estimate it could take hundreds more to meet demand. Lithium isn't the only thirsty industry in the Atacama Desert. Chile is also the world's largest producer of copper, a highly conductive metal and another key ingredient in EV batteries. An electric car can contain over 80 kilograms of the metal, more than twice the amount used in cars with an internal combustion engine. In each battery cell, copper foil placed over the negative end or the anode acts as a bridge to the outer circuit, allowing electricity to flow through the car. It's also of course used in a car's wiring and electric motor.
The existing mines in places like Chile, they've been going for decades, so they are coming close to the end of their lives, so we need new copper mines.
Finding and developing a new copper mine can take years and billions of dollars. Most copper mines look like this, vast open pits where the rock is blasted out of the earth with explosives, leaving behind stepped walls that can plunge half a mile into the earth. In many cases, these pits remain long after the mine has shut down. This one in Butte, Montana, closed down in the 1980s, and the pumps that would normally keep water out were shut down. The liquid you see is in fact a bath of acids and heavy metals leached from the surrounding rock. In 2016, over 3,000 geese died soon after landing on the lake. Now workers have to keep a round-the-clock vigil, scaring away migratory birds with gunshots, lasers, even drones. If birds land here and start drinking the toxic brew, it can cause organ failure. It's Mark Mariano's mission to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, Mark Mariano, Waterfowl Protection Specialist. We invented that title, but it fits.
These are propane cannons, and they fire all day.
They mimic gunfire, which a lot of the birds are scared of for obvious reasons.
On special occasions, the birds might get their own private fireworks display.
This is a kind of a last resort, or we know, something big would be coming. We've used them twice.
This acid lake is an extreme outcome, but there's evidence toxic waste rock has contaminated soil near copper mines around the world. As the EV market continues to grow, so does the demand for copper, although design improvements mean that less will be needed per vehicle in the years to come. Meanwhile, the US still has considerable copper reserves, as does Chile and the likes of Australia and Peru. Other battery metals are not so well distributed, like cobalt. The metal is a popular choice for battery makers because it withstands high temperatures and doesn't corrode easily. It goes in the cathode of the most common battery type, NMC. And just one African nation is responsible for producing over 70% of the world's cobalt.
The Democratic Republic of Congo is the Saudi Arabia of cobalt, or much more than that, in fact. They really have a very uniquely dominant position.
Mining here has exploded since 2000, driven largely by Chinese investment. Between 15 and 30% of the cobalt ore comes from artisanal mines, meaning low-tech, informal mining operations. Miners use whatever tools they have available, often without protective equipment. Miners here dig shafts into the earth and rock to reach seams of cobalt. The tunnels are cut by hand and have been known to collapse and kill. Mwandanji Olivier has been working in these mines for 22 years.
Cha kwanza mbele mimi naingia na ile imani ya Mungu akuseke Mungu atanichunga. Na mimi mwenyewe mencho yangu iko naona kile niko nafanya. Ifo mimi na sasa itanipeleka ku riske. Allez passer par là. Oh là là. Tenez ça même à la main. Wow. Hapa hivi njo kwa taki. Hii yote unaona hivi ni maproduit. Ni maproduit hivi. Unaona? Hii yote hii ni maproduit.
Mwandanji and a team of 3 others work here. They cut chunks of ore from the walls
Njo produit, njo Cobalt hii.
and later haul their load back up to the surface. Miners take the rocks to a local depot where they are assessed and weighed. Mwandanji can earn between $200 and $300 a week. The price can change on a daily basis, depending on the value of cobalt on the global market. He says he makes enough money to support his family.
Niko na batoto 8, batoto wangu banafundaka, batoto wangu banakuraka, donc artisanal njo muletoka shina ku societe.
Hundreds of thousands of people work in DRC's artisanal cobalt mining sector. Men tend to work as miners and traders, while women find work processing the ore.
Mie umu kaji mine nesha mo miaka 5 ya kutumika muikaji ya komia kol.
Clarice says this site follows strict rules.
Umu miaka ya yulu inakataziwa muikaji yetu.
But over the years, human rights groups have also raised the alarm about child labour at unregulated mining sites. A 2016 Amnesty International report found thousands of children working as artisanal miners.
The Amnesty report really opened a lot of people's eyes to what was actually going on in the DRC and the extent of abuses. Most companies had little idea about where they got their cobalt or what was going on.
Some manufacturers looked to source their cobalt from large industrial operations instead.
These mines are big operations, fenced off, secured, big processing plants, big open pit mines.
But these mines haven't been without their problems either. Satellite imagery shows how massive mining pits have consumed large parts of Kolwezi in the south of the country. Another Amnesty report, this time focusing on large Chinese and European-run mining operations in the DRC, details how residents have been forced from their homes to make room for the pits. In some cases, residents were physically assaulted and even had their houses set on fire. Locals say hundreds of homes have disappeared.
On a été plus de 300 personnes, 300 maisons. Maintenant, il y a des maisons vraiment par-ci par-là. C'est comme si quelqu'un qui n'a pas de dents dans la bouche.
Meanwhile, artisanal mining hasn't gone away, and many don't want it to.
Hapa hii ni independent tunatumika tu, mtu wote anakuya anatumika, anaenda kumezwa na uhusisha anapata makuta yake.
Human rights groups say that improving working conditions at these mines is a better approach than trying to outlaw them altogether. And it's difficult for battery or car manufacturers to know which type of mine the cobalt comes from, since the ores mix together at refining plants. Almost all of the DRC's cobalt ends up in China, where it has helped put around 14 million EVs on its roads, way more than Europe and the US. In fact, the DRC has a long history of foreign countries benefiting from its riches. Over 100 years ago, Belgian colonizers scoured the vast country for its mineral wealth.
Ces prospecteurs belges cherchaient de l'or. Ils trouvent au Katanga de fabuleux gisements de cuivre, d'étain, de charbon.
Later, other Western powers relied on the country for minerals used in military aircraft.
Without strategic materials, and by strategic materials I mean ones like cobalt, we really couldn't make a jet engine.
Today, the metallic element is used in things like paints, alloys, and batteries. Conventional combustion engine vehicles don't use any. The mining boom, driven largely by EVs, has transformed the DRC's economy as well. But the majority of Congolese people are not feeling the benefit of the country's mineral riches. Economists call it the resource curse.
We've seen countries who have been blessed with natural resources that often it's elites that benefit. You get these booms where they're actually more destructive than beneficial.
That's partly because minerals like cobalt gain value as they move through the supply chain, from ore to refined metals to batteries.
It's difficult for many resource-rich countries to have the infrastructure, the energy, the chemicals, etc. that's needed to produce processed products.
But whether processed at home or abroad, the amount of cobalt used in the most common EV battery, NMC, is going down, from 1/3 of the cathode to just 10%. The trade-off means using more nickel. And 6,500 miles away, one country is poised to benefit massively from that change.
Indonesia is the world's largest nickel producer, and it's just going to extend that lead this decade.
Unlike the DRC, Indonesia receives far more investment from foreign mining firms and car makers, including from China, the US and Korea, for things like refineries and battery plants, helping it hold on to more of the supply chain. The country's leaders banned nearly all nickel exports after decades of shipping it off to foreign stainless steel plants with little economic gain to show for it.
Now they're saying, well, we've got all the processed nickel here, why don't you come build your battery factory in Indonesia? And then they're saying, why don't you build your electric vehicle factory?
Nickel mining in Indonesia is concentrated on the resource-rich island of Sulawesi, where mineral extraction is increasingly coming into conflict with nearby agriculture.
Jangan dulu garap di sini, tapi mereka pihak tambang ini dia tidak dengar.
These are clove farms, and some locals say mining companies have forcibly cleared their lands.
Karena ini pohon cengkeh sudah habis semua, gemetar. Ini mata pencahariannya kita sudah di situ, sudah kita impi-impikan anak kita nantinya kalau dia kuliah di situ pas kita naik itu tidak ada, itu hancur.
Now they patrol the land themselves, armed and ready to defend their crops. Meanwhile, pollution from the mines has washed into the sea, visible here on the left, and it's having a direct impact on fishing.
Di atas udah ditambang, di sana udah laut dan lumpur. Mereka mau berkembang kemana kira?
Nggak begini, bersih, bisa mandi-mandi, bisa mancing, sekarang tidak bisa.
So far, the vast majority of nickel coming out of Indonesia has gone to make stainless steel, not batteries. That's because most of the country's ore has low nickel content. But Indonesia wants a larger piece of the EV pie and plans to scale up a process called high-pressure acid leaching. This technique can transform low-grade ore into the kind of nickel useful to the EV battery industry. But it uses hot sulfuric acid and can leave behind hazardous waste that can cause environmental destruction if not properly stored. The eastern side of the Indonesian archipelago is inside what's known as the Coral Triangle, an area with more diverse marine life than anywhere else on the planet. And the nation as a whole is home to more than 1/10 of the world's mammal species, and nearly 1/5 of all bird species. Environmental concerns have given some investors pause. In 2022, Indonesian officials said Tesla would soon invest $5 billion in local nickel processing. But an open letter from environmental groups to CEO Elon Musk called for an end to all nickel investments in the country. It cites water and air pollution, land grabbing and systemic large-scale environmental damage. The deal didn't go through, and Tesla switched its standard-ranged vehicles to a nickel-free variety. The Indonesian government says it will improve environmental monitoring at mining sites, but operations aren't likely to scale down anytime soon.
Indonesia is the nickel producer to watch this decade, and we won't have, in many cases, electric vehicles without Indonesia.
7,500 miles away on the west coast of Africa, Gabon is busy mining another key ingredient in EV battery cathodes, manganese. A company called Cobalt, owned by French mining interests, has operated here since 1951, leading to massive population growth and development. The company says it's invested millions of dollars in social projects that improve access to education and water. But some locals say they've been left behind.
Ici, sur la route noire de Combustion, nous n'avons pas de courant, nous n'avons pas d'eau. Nous n'avons pas de pompe publique, donc nous voulons avoir de l'eau et le courant.
Meanwhile, the government is counting on mining for manganese, iron and gold as it tries to transition away from an oil-based economy. Right now, the majority of Gabon's manganese is used for making steel, not EV batteries, but EV demand for the metal could grow eightfold by 2030. There is one place where manganese, nickel and cobalt can all be found together, and it's not on land, but within potato-sized rocks lying more than 2 miles below the ocean's surface. They're called polymetallic nodules, and there could be billions of tons of them in the ocean. A Canadian startup called the Metals Company wants to be the first to cash in. On a test run in 2022, it scooped up what the founder says is the world's biggest haul yet.
This is history. I've never stood in this. No one has. No one.
Gerard Barron is on a decade-long quest to mine the deep. His last venture ran out of money.
I wanted to do something that was near impossible. You know, I was pretty sure that if I didn't do this, then it may not move forward. And that would be a travesty. The technology is available to collect these rocks at a commercial scale.
Here's how it works. The ship lowers a collector vehicle into the water. The prototype weighs 90 tons and is about the size of a minibus.
Copy.
Operators drive the collector remotely from inside the control room.
Yeah, nodules.
Each vehicle has 4 nozzles and sensors that adjust their positions.
They hover just above the seabed, and the nodules that are laying there are sucked into the nozzle. They work kind of like a vacuum cleaner.
The machine also collects the top few centimeters of mud. Internal pumps separate that from the rocks and shoot some of the sediment back out. Next, air bubbles push rocks, mud, and seawater up a tube that can extend up to 2.5 miles. After about 12 minutes, the slurry reaches the surface. Here, a whirlpool uses gravity to separate the nodules from water and sediment. Nodules are found in flat, soft parts of the deep ocean floor around the world. One of the most promising nodule fields is in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, a stretch of Pacific Ocean floor about as wide as the continental United States. A promotional video for the Metals Company calls this mining area
a vast underwater desert.
But even deserts have life in them, and this stretch of seafloor does too. Recent expeditions have found a never-before-seen octopus, a swarm of eels eating bait, plus sea cucumbers, fish, and species not found anywhere else. No matter how careful the miners are, some environmental impact is impossible to avoid.
We can't really predict the scale of species extinctions that would come from that much mining, but there's reason to think it could be significant.
we don't actually know enough yet to understand all these impacts and therefore the costs.
Deep-sea mining in international waters is regulated by the International Seabed Authority. By the end of 2023, it had granted exploration contracts to 31 companies and governments. It takes a different type of contract to mine the seafloor at commercial scale, and no one has one of those yet. If all goes according to plan, the metals company aims to build processing centres at ports that will melt and refine the rocks. The nodules wouldn't leave behind tons of waste rock like other ores do.
We generate zero waste and zero tailings. We don't have the risk of any child labour. We can commercially pick up these rocks and help stop some of the terrible deforestation of our most biodiverse habitats on land.
However, it's not clear yet whether ventures like this can scale. And experts say there's no evidence land-based mining would go away or even decline if seafloor mining takes off.
You'll just end up with a situation that you are going to have increased ecological harm on land and then at sea as well.
One mineral that can't be found in nodules but makes up the largest part of any EV battery is graphite. It's used in the anode or negative end of each battery cell. Most EVs use synthetic graphite derived from coal, but there's still demand for natural graphite, which is cheaper, and China is the world's largest producer of both. The country produces 70% of the world's mined graphite, but in 2023 announced it was restricting exports. The move spooked foreign EV makers who are wary of their over-reliance on Chinese supply. As the world races to find a more diverse supply, countries like Sri Lanka are hoping to cash in. The country is home to what's called vein graphite, the purest natural form of the element. But at the moment, Sri Lankan graphite is mainly used for steel making and as an industrial lubricant. And working in the mines is difficult and dangerous. Neil Suresh Abisekara has worked in Kahatagaha, Sri Lanka's biggest graphite mine, for 11 years. It descends 2,000 feet, the deepest in the country.
අටේ මට්ටම තියෙන්නේ. අටේ මට්ටමේ ගිහිල්ලා අයත් ඔය වගේ එකකින් අය යන්න ඕනි. එමෙවිදි මට්ටම් 4-5ම තියෙනවා යන්න 2000 දක්වා යන්න.
To mine the graphite, Neil and his colleagues use drills and explosives.
මේ අපි දැන් ලැහැත් මේ වෙඩි ගැටයක් බඳින්න යන්නේ. මේකට කියන්නේ වෙඩි ගැටේ බඳිනවා කියලා. මේකල මේක ඇතුළට වෙඩි කවා ගන්න ඕනි මේක. ඊට පස්සේ මේක තදට
Working so far underground can make it hard to breathe. The work exposes miners to toxic air particles, putting them at risk of lung diseases like pneumoconiosis.
හදිස්සියේ ලෙඩෙක් තුවාල කකුලක් අහරෙන් කකුලක් කැපිලා අතපය කැපිලා රවිද ගන්න බැරිනොත් එහෙම මේකේ හාන්සි කරවලා තමයි මේ ඩක්කු පාරේ ඩක්කුවකට සයි කරන්න මේක තියෙනවා. සයි කරලා තමයි අරගෙන යන්න ලිස්ට් එක ගාවට.
But if the lift breaks or the power is cut, the only way out is this ladder. About 60 workers earn a living from the mine here in Kahatagaha, but it's not much. In January 2020, mine workers went on a hunger strike for increased wages for the first time since 2012. The government gave workers an increase of just 50 rupees a day, that's 3 US cents, promising to meet other demands in the future. But those needs have still not been met. With more modern machinery, Sri Lanka could be well placed to tap into the huge demand for graphite from the EV industry. Miners here just hope they won't be left behind. Whether on land or at sea, every form of mining comes with trade-offs. After extraction and refining, battery metals head to gigafactories like this one. At the moment they roll off the assembly line, EVs have a carbon footprint about 30% larger than internal combustion engine cars on average. However, that begins to change as soon as you start the engine. Because driving an EV has no direct emissions, they still have a lower climate impact over their lifetime, even if they're charged with electricity that comes from fossil fuels. Reducing greenhouse gases is the #1 tool humans have to fight the climate crisis, which is displacing people and threatening many species. As EVs enter the mainstream, consumer power, Sanderson says, will likely force car manufacturers and mining companies to clean up their acts.
Consumers, I think, are in a powerful position because electric vehicles are still relatively new to many people. It's supposed to be a better product. People care more about where all the materials come from, so that's helping to drive change.
Meanwhile, one of the best ways to clean up the EV supply chain is by minimizing the need for mining in the first place, which means reusing and recycling as much as possible. A handful of startups use end-of-life EV batteries for large-scale energy storage, fields of lithium-ion batteries, which will be an essential part of scaling up wind and solar power. And recycling rates for battery metals are trending upwards. The US, Europe and Asia have seen massive public and private investment in recycling infrastructure. Getting the minerals out of the complex battery cells is its own puzzle. Crushing or shredding the batteries is risky because they can catch fire under pressure. A company called Li-Cycle says its process addresses that issue. The team built a machine that slices batteries into confetti-like shreds while keeping them submerged in liquid.
Without oxygen, there's no fire.
That liquid also helps separate the plastic, which many recyclers just burn away. What is left is metallic foil.
So behind me, we're bagging that metallic foil, and we sell this for the copper content as well as the precious metals.
And black mass.
Black mass contains the nickel, the cobalt, manganese, graphite, lithium, etc.
As recycling operations like this scale up, recovered metals could eventually account for about half of the amount of cobalt and nickel the world uses, but that might not happen until the year 2050. By then, investments in public transportation and greater awareness of the climate crisis will possibly have even brought about a less car-centric world. But while the car continues to be king, Sanderson says the electrification of transit is essential.
We shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and it pales in comparison to the destruction wreaked on the planet by our addiction to fossil fuels, and that we need to make this shift